After the settling of the East, German cavalry officer August von Mackensen turns his momentum south, leading a coalition to suppress the intransigent Serbia. Franco-British troops land in the Greek port of Salonika, hoping to advance to rescue Serbia. But Bulgarian entry to the war blocks their path in the mountains of Macedonia. The Serbians withdraw, scorching the earth in their wake. Their aim is to so devastate the country that its occupation will pose a tremendous economic drain to Austria. In this they will succeed, at the cost of a quarter of their pre-war population. The Italians doggedly strike against the Austrian front, as they have done for months. But the onset of bitter cold slows their activity in the Alps. But the Italians are determined. When the surface no longer permits activity, they will dig their way toward Austrian lines. And under the bare rock and packed ice of mountain slopes, they will fight hand to hand in subterranean labyrinths. The Serbians fall back to the Italian port of Vlore in modern-day Albania. And with the assistance of the Royal Navy, more than 250,000 soldiers are evacuated to the Greek island of Corfu. A parallel evacuation begins in haste on the Turkish peninsula of Gallipoli. The brilliant Turkish general Mustafa Kemal has thrashed British attempts to reach Constantinople, and with the hopelessness of the operation laid bare by Bulgarian entry to the war, the British withdraw their forces to Salonika. The Greek Prime Minister aids the Franco-British build-up, but the king reaffirms his neutrality. And so a bizarre fiction is maintained, where Greece remains out of the war despite facilitating an Entente presence in Thrace. With the Russians pushed safely distant from the German heartland, Falkenhayn makes the boldest gamble of his career, leaving his forces in the east dangerously understaffed. The Russian armies are able to catch their breath and swell with rapidly arriving French and British military aid. A stern advocate for the defeat of France, Falkenhayn prepares to roll the dice and strike them with every ounce of steel and strength Germany can muster. The proliferation of aeroplane reconnaissance has made the battlefield more transparent than ever. And with the lattice of French fieldworks ahead, there is no hope for decisive surprise or a quick breakthrough. The logic of attritional war will guide Falkenhayn. It will be a battle of wills. And with no room to maneuver, they will attack headlong into French defenses. They will attack at the citadel of Verdun. On the 21st of February, hell is raised. Storm troops advance on French positions behind the thunder and steel of the combined German military. As expected, the French stand and fight, and the salient at Verdun becomes ground for the most fierce exchange of the war so far. The Germans spray orange flame 50 feet ahead of them from handheld flamethrowers, as the soil ahead of them is churned so thoroughly by artillery that Frenchmen are buried alive, still clutching their rifles. The Entente move to rescue the crisis at Verdun, even if it means further violating international norms. The Entente armies in Salonika advance to engage the Bulgarians directly on the Greek border, while Russia bravely assaults the northern grouping of German forces in a pincer attack from Lake Narak and Riga. But in the mud and slush of the Belarusian thaw, their attack is easily parried with disastrous losses. But thankfully, Russia has much more to give, and the other allies of the French Republic have not sat idly by. A grand offensive from all sides is planned in which Italy and Russia will crush Austria, while Britain works hand in hand with the French Republic to breach the German line on the Somme River. Meanwhile, in Greece, Serbians form entire armies in exile, eager to not miss out their moment in history. In Ireland, an unexpected new front briefly flashes into existence as separatists take up arms against the British government. They are crushed. The British line the instigators in front of crowds of dismayed onlookers. And one by one they are shot by firing squad. There will be no mercy for traitors. Shortly beforehand, the British government enacted extensive conscription for the tremendous losses it secretly expects in the coming operation. Austrians, oblivious to the storm ahead, launch headfirst over the mountains of the southern Alps, aiming to strangle the head of the Italian army in the Po Valley. The Italians assemble an emergency army and desperately hold the Austrians on the Asiago Plateau, with just a few rolling hills between them and a breakout into open country. But in the east, the Russian giant looms large. On the morning of the 4th of June, panicked dispatches arrive indicating that the Austrian front has been completely swept. The Russian offensive has begun. In a moment, Falkenhayn is thrown into panic as Hindenburg takes charge of the desperate defense in the east. The German reserve army is stripped of training officers to pull what scraps can be found forward into ad hoc formations, temporarily slowing the tide of the Russians. In the west, Britain, along with what forces the French Republic can spare, prepare their own operation. On the morning of the 1st of July, behind a multi-day blanket of shell fire, the British and French advance on smoldering German lines. The offensive on the Somme has begun. On the first day alone, the British hopes of a breakthrough are dashed as 6 entire divisions of men vanish in the fields. But through sheer sacrifice, the Germans are bled white. In the southeast, the defenders are driven to the end of their mortal coil, and for moments with the destiny of the world in the air, the wounded and dying fight to stem the tide. Italians breach the Alpine front, nearly encircling half of the Fifth Army on the Adriatic coast. But furious Austrian counterattacks deny them their victory. While in desperation, Germany can no longer afford patience with the fiction of Greek neutrality. It sanctions a full invasion of the country. The German position around Verdun is reversed, as French General Nivelle orders his forces on the offensive. Sensing its moment of opportunity, Romania pours over the Carpathian Mountains. But with the tiring out of the Russian offensive, Germany and Austria can, by the skin of their teeth, assemble sufficient force facing Romania. But the weight of the war is too much. The Austrian High Command falters and is taken under direct German command. The Germans prove unable to dislodge the Allies from Salonika. They have played into the Western hand, allowing them to form yet another front against the besieged center of Europe. But the situation for the Allies is far from good. With the failure of the 1916 operations, Britain is at its wit's end and almost completely bankrupt. Over the coming half a year, the biggest financier on the planet will become the world's greatest debtor, giving the United States a dangerous addiction to British war bonds. Romania, meanwhile, with poorly led and even worse equipped troops, proves no match against the seasoned veterans of the Central Powers. Once again, Mackensen, the Cossack of the Vistula and slayer of Serbia, is called on to lead a coalition to put Romania to rest. Every flag of the Central Powers is represented under his command, even the Turks. While further to the north, Germany establishes a client kingdom in Poland. A desperate attempt to woo the Poles to their side. It will be needed. To the extreme north, the Petrograd to Murmansk railway has been completed. And if Russia can summon the same sacrifice next year as it did in 1916, their ranks flooded with Entente equipment, they will be virtually unstoppable. Germany reaches across the Atlantic and begs the giant to step in and broker a peace. But with communications painfully sparse, with the German transatlantic cables cut, and the British whispering in America's ear, there will be no response. There is no end in sight.